Call the Special Ordinance Committee meeting to order of October 11th, 2022. And can we start with a roll call?
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Chair Sneddon.
Here.
And Oscar Gutierrez is on his way.
Thank you. And do we have any changes to the agenda or public comment not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll invite presentation of the first item on California Building and Fire Codes adoption.
Good morning, Chair Stin and committee. My name is Tina Dye. I'm your Chief Building Official, and I have with me Ryan DiGiulio, the Fire Marshal, and we're happy to present the 2022 California Building Standard Code adoption. So we'll get right to it. A little bit of background, the State Building Standard Codes is also referred to as Title 24 Codes, which is something you've probably heard of. And Building and Safety adopts parts 1 through 8 and 10 through 12. Some of those include the building code, the plumbing code, electrical code, and some more. And the fire prevention adopts part 9, which is the fire code. So every 3 years, the State Building Standards Commission facilitates a process of public hearings based on to get input from state agencies, professional organizations, local fire and building officials, and the general public. And the topic is the national and international codes. Whoops. So the state code is effective January 1st, 2023, and compliance with state code is mandatory. We do not have to adopt a local amendments, or we do not have to make local amendments, but if we do, we have to adopt them via local ordinance, and this needs to be done 30 days prior to January 1st, 2023. So the process for amendments is that some of the criteria is that the amendments we make have to be more restrictive than the minimum state standards. And we have to produce findings of either administrative, geological, topographical, or climatical in nature. And state law requires that we hold 2 public hearings, which we have to notice for 2 successive weeks prior to the meetings. Our first reading will go to council on 11/8/2022. And our second reading and adoption will be on November 15th, 2022. We did some additional voluntary outreach, which included a survey to our local our stakeholder groups. And then after analyzing that data, we held a public workshop virtually. Attachment 2 in the CAR shows the summary of amendments for the Building and Fire Code. Let me correct that. It's attachment 2 and attachment 4 show our local amendments that we're proposing. So they're by code and section number and subject. And then there's a brief description of each amendment proposed. And then it will tell you if it's new, existing, or revised. It also lists the necessary finding that is necessary for the state to honor our amendments. So for the building code this cycle, we're proposing 3 very minor amendments, and so I'll just go through those quickly. We are removing a requirement for a permit for drainage at walls that are otherwise exempt from a permit. And we are adding a requirement for a permit for retaining walls and non-retaining walls if they're of a particular type of construction. So for this amendment would be if they are a masonry or concrete built. And then the last change is that we are changing the number of required Board of Appeals members from 5 to 4 to form a quorum. And for the fire code, we are changing the number of required Board of Appeals members to be consistent with the building code change from 5 to 4 for a quorum. And the last thing I wanted to highlight is that we have been deemed CEQA exempt from our planning department with the changes that we're proposing. So the recommendation is for approval to the City Council, an ordinance amending Santa Barbara Municipal Code 2204 and 804, adopting by reference the 2022 California Building Standards Codes, Part 1 through 12. Part 9 is the 2022 Fire Code, and certain appendices of said codes, adopting local amendments to said codes and repealing ordinances 5919 and 5779. And that concludes the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, Ryan DiGiulio is here as well for fire code questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dye, for your presentation. Do we have questions? Councilmember Jordan?
Thank you. So that all just kind of looks like cleanup to me. So I was just wondering between the two of you if there's anything that controversial would be maybe too inflaming of a word, but is there anything that's an abrupt change in direction or application that stands out to both of you that might not be seen with somebody out in the public trying to read a bundle of pages? I'm just wondering.
Thank you, Committee Member Jordan. I don't believe so. We tried to minimize making any changes that would have that effect.
Committee Member Jordan, I'll go into specifics a little bit. Chapter 49 of the Fire Code deals with the wildland urban interface area. The state has not caught up yet to how restrictive we are here through our amendments. So, as you can imagine, the state varies greatly in their requirements for the WUI areas. Some people might look at those sections in the fire code and say, oh, I'm in compliance, without actually looking at how robust our amendments are in our Muni code. So the state has not caught up to us yet on a local level. So that's kudos to the effort that we take here on the city and our geographical and topographical considerations to beef up those sections of the fire code. But besides that, there's nothing that I think would be a red flag for the public to look at this new code cycle and say that, well, that's out of right field. So,
And to that point, particularly for something like wildfire actions we take, that's the point of this process, right? Is to tailor it, not to get around the state and make it less, but to tailor it to something that's local on the ground here that needs more than what the state offers, right?
correct, and legally we have to make it more restrictive.
Okay.
And that fits here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Do we have other questions? Councilmember Gutierrez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. When it comes to slide number 5, where you were able to get the findings, who exactly did you get the findings from? Did you actually consult with geologists and other experts?
Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. Local findings are based on local conditions, so we know what our local conditions are. For instance, for fire sprinkler requirements, they're more restrictive here because of proximity to, or for one of the reasons is WUI areas, right? So we know that we are in areas that have greater risks for fire, so we can amend our code to be more restrictive. So that's how we do that process. We know it just based on our local conditions.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you. And with that, we'll have public comment. Joe Andrulaitis. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Joe Andrulaitis. I'm a local architect. I've been trying for months to get the building department to approve gender-neutral restrooms. We successfully did it on one project in the Funk Zone, but there were some restrictions that aren't going to work for future projects. I gave Tina and Jose some backup data and language to use for an amendment to the code, for a local code to allow it. And I just want that to be considered as an option for the code cycle looking forward. As you know, gender-neutral bathrooms solve a lot of issues. And I would ask you to visit the one at Validation Ale in the bunk zone. It works very well, and people are pleased with the outcome. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, I'll ask a follow-up question about, from public comment, if that is something that could be considered in the code.
Thank you, Chair Sneddon. If you look at the slide that's on the presentation now, we do have restrictions on our local amendments. We have to be more restrictive, if any. We can't be less restrictive. And the findings have to meet one of these criteria. It has to be administrative in nature, geological, topographical, or climatical. So that being said, we can always consider a request by policy, but we wouldn't be able to make a local amendment regarding what Mr.
Androlaitis.
Thank you, Androlaitis is speaking of, in my opinion.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, what would be the proper place for that if we wanted to allow that in our codes?
It would be by policy and interpretation of a code section. But again, we can't be less restrictive than the minimum plumbing requirements. And there are minimums for number of restrooms or number of plumbing fixtures. So we can't be less restrictive than the minimums of the state code.
Okay. I just want to make sure we've thoroughly exhausted that, because gender-neutral bathrooms seem like a good, equitable idea. Councilmember Jordan?
So so just to work in my frame of reference brain, that's a situation that obviously makes sense, probably, but so we're just stuck in this spot where the state, we could say our opinion is the state is behind the times with those type of accommodations, and as long as they remain behind the times, there's nothing we can do.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. John Duemas, do you have anything that you could add that might help in this situation?
Sure, absolutely. There are code sections dealing with, in terms of the requirements of what constitutes a bathroom, and there are a series of gender, many places have enacted those ordinances or laws in San Diego, LA, everywhere else regarding gender neutral bathrooms. I don't think the state is behind the times. I think the state, we need to follow state law if we even want to go even further to address issues on that. Obviously, it's a policy question, and we can do that. We can certainly make amendments to our ordinance on that issue. So that's not a problem, and we can present that issue. At least present that if it's a policy question the ordinance committee has, either to come back. Well, the timeline makes it difficult for the state, but we can certainly present that issue, show what the state law is, present that to council, and then find an amendment to that in our
So is it
code.
just like, this is what we wanted this conversation to devolve to, I'm sure, but a space issue, and the state requires both a urinal and a toilet in a dual gender bathroom, and if you don't have the space for that, then you can't comply? Is that what this really boils down to?
The state law in terms of requiring the number of facilities, how it's operated, a common thing is you will have maybe an area where you open a door and you have individual doors there that each have their own sink, toilet, etc. But then when they open the door, there's also a general larger sink and all that. That's one concept I've seen.
Like a
even here
multi-person
locally.
bathroom?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
multi-person of one concept. So, we can certainly present what the laws and regulations of how it's defined by the state, so for at least council to look at that. I think it's important for council to actually see what the state definition law is in terms of,
Okay.
of bathrooms.
I'd be in favor of that too. I think that'd be a great discussion, especially when we're trying to reuse existing buildings where you have a static footprint, and if you just need one, if you can find a way to do one bathroom for multiple genders or multiple, I mean, in the real world, you should have, all bathrooms should be multiple genders, probably, just for the most flexibility, so, okay, so.
Thank you. So is it the will of the committee that that is an issue that we support and would like further input on from our legal team? Is that, okay.
Yeah.
Does that work, Mr. Doimus?
Yeah, I think that's what's needed, is to at least present the issue, what the state laws are, show that we've already, it'd be an easy turnaround because our office has already done work on this issue in terms of identifying what the state laws is and have given guidance to the department. So we can present at least what the current law is based on that issue for the ordinance committee to see and council going forward.
Thank you. And then could I request that, Mr. Angelides, if you have input on that, that you work with Mr. Doimus to share that with him?
Done extensive research, so yeah, I'd love to be a part of the discussion.
Okay. Thank you so much for bringing that forward. Do we have any other questions or comments at this time? Councilmember Gutierrez.
Yeah, I just want to thank the architect for voicing that. I used to work as a bouncer downtown, and I still frequent establishments downtown and all over town. And it's not really an issue. For me, this isn't really an issue of like identity politics or what have you. It's just an access issue, because I've personally seen it that, you know, one bathroom, mainly the men's, there's no line, but the women's bathroom is going out the door, and I always felt like that wasn't fair. So just making them gender neutral would probably alleviate that and potentially avoid a fire hazard because of the crowd of people that are waiting for one bathroom. So I do consider this a pretty important issue to be addressed citywide. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Jordan.
So is mechanics for that to bring back some ideas when it comes to council, or move this forward as it is, and then do we have to wait 3 years to worry about it again, or do we do stuff where we change stuff like this on the fly in the meantime, in between times? How does that work?
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. We could modify or interpret by policy a code section without making a local amendment, which is what we did previously on the project that he was talking about. He wants it to be a local amendment in our adopting ordinance. So if we do not come to a conclusion, we can always interpret the code section differently or create a policy and use that until our next code adoption.
Okay.
3 years from now.
3 years from now.
Correct.
Thank you. So, Mr. Doimus, do you have enough direction that when it comes to council for first reading, that if it's possible to have something that addresses that it be in that first reading?
Absolutely. Chair Sneddon, Ordinance Committee, absolutely do. And as I said, there's multiple ordinances that deal with all gender toilet facilities, and so many of the larger cities have incorporated state law in terms of meeting the requirement of the number of facilities and how many people. If it's like 50, if the occupancy of the building, you have to factor that in too, if it's 50 or more, 50 or less. And it holds true to those requirements in terms of how much, but then also what constitutes a gender neutral facility. So we have that. So we have enough at least to give direction to give, and working with the architect. I apologize, I'm not remembering his name.
Joe Androlaitis.
Thank you so much. To at least give council options and including potential amendment within our code.
Thank you so much. I think that works, and we'll look forward to that and trust your legal expertise that you have direction from us, that we'd like to see that if possible. Does that work?
I'll move the staff recommendation for this, and with the addition of the work that when it comes to council, that we'll get a presentation on potential pathways to consider more opportunity for gender-free bathrooms in the updated code.
I second that.
Thank you. And just a comment to the motion. I really want to thank you for managing all these codes, and I think we've learned so much about how that keeps us safe in high fire zones, and that we really rely on people complying with codes, and you put so much effort into that as well. And when it comes to fire science, it is indeed a science, and our fire department is really a leader in that area. So I appreciate that our codes are more restrictive, and really appreciate the presentation today. Any other comment, or we're ready to vote?
So committee is
Councilmember
going
Gut-
to vote to move the recommendations to council with potential ordinance amendments for gender-neutral restrooms to be brought back.
Yes.
Moved by Councilmember Jordan. Seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Aye.
Chair Sneddon.
Yes. Thank you. And with that, we will get ready to hear our next item, which is a carryover on the Single Family Design Board membership criteria and quorum requirements. We previously heard a presentation, and I believe staff will have some further information for us, and then we can deliberate.
Chair Sneddon, as you may have noted in the staff report, staff indicated that public comment may be opened to members of the public that had not previously spoken.
Thank you so much for clarifying that.
So good morning, committee members, Chair Sneddon, committee members. Ellen Kokinda, again, I'm the Design Review and Historic Preservation Supervisor in the Planning Division. No real new information today. This is really just a chance to follow up if you have any additional questions. I know that our time was cut short last week, and you weren't able to deliberate or discuss, but again, here to answer any questions you have. I can just go back and describe a little bit, just to kind of put this into perspective, that right now the Single Family Design Board's membership has 7 members. They need to be residents of Santa Barbara County. And the qualifications that they have: 2 licensed architect, 1 licensed landscape architect, and 3 persons with professional qualifications, and then 1 representative at the public at large. And that we were simply asking, because of the latest quorum challenges that we're having, and issues with, general issues with recruiting, that we're looking to reduce the membership to 5 members, and then designate that 3 of those members would constitute a quorum. And just a point to that is really to understand that when we're asking for 3 members constituting quorum, that we're not designating a specific member of who needs to make up quorum. So that's really one of the big changes, because the current makeup is that a licensed architect has to be there as a member of the 4-person quorum. And then you see here that the qualifications, we've drafted it that the 3 members profess professional qualifications, which could include licensed architect, licensed landscape architect, but it's really a little bit more all-inclusive, and that's really to the decision of the city council as you go through your recruitment process. And just to point out again that even though the city clerk's office runs the recruitment process, we do a lot on the back end to try to find you qualified candidates. And as you're familiar with trying to seek them out yourself and encourage people to apply, you know it's really difficult to do that sometimes. And but our effort doesn't stop. We will constantly try to, for each cycle, we will do that extra outreach and trying to find good candidates who understand public process, or who are interested in it and want to be involved, and that also meet the qualifications. And then up to 2 members would be appointed from the public at large. So that's our request today. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, we're here happy to answer.
Thank you so much, and thank you for taking time with me yesterday to answer some more questions that I had. Do we have any additional public comment? None. Okay, so we're ready to either ask more questions if anybody has any, or to deliberate if there are any comments. Ready at this time? Comments? Yep. Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the extra week was good. So kind of take a breath and think about this. And, kind of just have one tangent thought since I saw Ms. Bjork walk back into, this isn't a unique problem to this board. there are other boards with varying degrees of the same kind of dynamics that come up. And I think just recognizing that the way we've always done boards might not be keeping up with modern times, which is generally once a year for the big turnover, and then in the middle of the year for the next. I mean, I think we just had an example of a fire and police commissioner a week after the resignation date turned in his resignation, and so if we weren't doing a special election for fire and police commission, we'd be automatically already down for 8 months with a fire and police commissioner. And I think one of my suggestion to try and work around that would be to empower somebody to decide when and where to pull board recruitments out of the normal fall and mid-year, when it's and just to determine a level of importance. You know, there are different levels of power boards in the food chain, and so if it's something that would meet, let's just say, for example, the city administrator's desire not to have a vacancy or two on a board, but it came up in after or in between, right in the middle of one of those things, that we run a particular special vacancy effort or recruitment effort for it, and you could do your interviews in one meeting, as long as you took the time to check with the available applicants and make sure that one meeting was going to work, that the council members were going to work. You could have your interviews, and potentially even at that meeting, or at worst the next meeting, boom, be ready to go and get that position backfilled again. It just seems to come up too much, and then people have pressure and they have to make the meetings, where generally the meeting schedule takes over their life rather than life taking over their life, and then they're giving some of their time to attend those meetings. So I think kind of just the big picture, I think we need to look at that and say that it's not necessarily working the way we did in the past. And I'm also, and then in regards to this particular design board, I'm hopeful that whatever we're calling residential objective design components, or some method of getting the low-hanging agreeable fruit off of the agenda, so that can be approved over the counter or by staff or whatever the right phrase would be, and lessen the opportunities to have that drag down board time and applicant time for arguably sometimes meaningless issues compared to the big issues, you know, whatever anybody thinks about those. So I think continuing to move as quickly as possible will also help this board and other design boards too that work on residential. Then to this, after giving it some thought for the last week, selfishly, what I really want is, I want to make sure that the people up here get to pick the people that they feel best suited for a board or commission at that particular point in time. And so I'd like the most flexibility possible in how you're setting this up. I'm agreeable with the reduction to 5 members. I'm agreeable with not having a designated type of person be part of the quorum, that any quorum of 3 is good. And then my suggestion would be is that we allow up to 3 in the professional category and up to 3 in the public at large. Obviously that equals 6, but that just means, like anything else, like when we do the neighborhood advisory committee or any of those others, and we're moving people around on a matrix, that if you already had your 3 on a board continuing, you would know at your recruitment that you're only recruiting for 3 neighborhood positions. So specifically to that, to the professional category, I would like to make sure that that language there isn't as generic as related to architecture, but that it says related to, or that it says an architect and related to architecture. So it puts part of the focus back on we are looking for architects. We're not telling you to go away, But if you're not an architect and what my dad would call a draftsman, a person who's drawing stuff but doesn't have their license, that the architecture category fills that, and then that we add on some phrase that works for you for a planning professional or planner. My example was, Suzanne Elledge. I'll just keep picking on her because she's retired, but somebody like that that has clearly has a resume, I think, that that meets the but not limited to category or phrasing in there, but specifically calls out that there are a bunch of planning type professionals in the city who do great job shepherding projects through, have their finger on the pulse, know the mistakes that could be made or shouldn't be made, and the membership, I think, would be benefited by having that specifically called out as one of those positions under the professional qualifications. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Councilmember Gutierrez?
Thank you. I feel a little apprehensive about limiting it down to 5 because I do believe that having as much opportunity to have a diverse viewpoints and voices on that board is pretty vital. But in the last few months, I've been speaking to a lot of board members and commission members throughout the city. And this was something that came up a few times about how they're not even able to meet because people aren't showing up. So it did make me question whether or not, like, who's that fall under? Is it on us for not doing a good enough job of vetting them, or is it on us for not being able to recruit better candidates? Yeah, I'm just apprehensive of changing it, but I understand that if we don't, then we're not actually fulfilling the purpose of the board. So I reluctantly will be supporting reducing the number down to 5 just so that it could be functional. But yeah, just those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. And then I have a follow-up legal question, I think. This comes up with HLC sometimes or it's a question of, can we, when we're doing appointments, move the category of a member? So say someone, when they were appointed, was appointed as a member at large, but is an architect, could, if there was an opening for that spot, could that person in the moment of that recruitment be redesignated without resigning first and then reapplying?
Chair Sned, and yes, we don't look at it as a redesignation. We just look at the qualifications and make sure that we're satisfying the minimum. So if the charter says we need, can't remember if it's 2 or 3, we look to make sure that we have 2 or 3. And of course, we encourage architects to apply, but in that instance, as long as we have the 3, we could accept other applications as well.
Unless it says something like at most.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, because that's something, I'll follow up with you on that, because that is something that has come up with the HLC appointments in that same way, and so I wanted to see if that would apply here, if we were limiting it. So as I heard Councilmember Jordan, 5 members, up to 3 professional category, and then up to 3 public at large, which would make, as the ordinance is written, that would make a quorum 4, because that would be a majority. If there were 6, Oh, so up to 3 and up to 3, but you would still have 5 members. Okay. And that, I think that's fine. And then I also agree with the architect and fields related to architecture, so that we have that as well. Do you feel like those comments give you enough latitude to be able to recruit?
Chair Snowden, thank you. Yes, I feel like that's, I'm still, I know that recruitment closed yesterday evening. Haven't asked the city clerk about update on how many applications we receive for SFDB, but I think that that's going to probably provide you more latitude as council to be able to have more opportunities potentially for people to apply and have some more flexibility. And you might find that you can craft the SFDB board that you want to have. With that said, I just still want to be realistic about recruitment process in general, and almost like any political position, it often takes multiple people asking an individual to consider applying for these things. So I think we have to be cognizant of that, and if there are individuals in mind in your neighborhoods, I think that who haven't had an opportunity to serve, like we as staff, we are so committed to trying to help them out, to get comfortable in public process, to get them trained properly. I would love to see new individuals apply, to see more diversity on the boards, and oftentimes that really takes many peoples to push and encourage applications to come through. So I try, and I recognize my own limits and look for you all and being able to help out significantly in that. And I think that we could be more intentional about that in the future.
Thank you, and I think we could be more intentional about that too. I know it's a monumental effort, and that was a good idea, recruiting from the neighborhoods and with different qualifications. I think that could make that more possible. I want to follow up on a comment from Councilmember Jordan about filling spots, if there's feedback on filling spots when it isn't the 6-month recruitment cycle. It happens a lot that nobody applies for a position and then it's open, whereas if someone came in a month from now and said they'd be willing to serve, could we consider a different recruitment for that?
Chair Sneddon, I think that's something we could look into and work with the clerk's office. While I do have the floor, I needed a little clarity so I can make sure I'm clear with what Councilmember Jordan was proposing with the up to 3 professionals and the up to 3 members of the public. In my mind, it seems like that might conflict because you get up to 3. So are you, and you could have none then?
Well, in that world, you could appoint, heaven help us, 5 architects, up to 3 with professional and the other 2 as members of the community, right?
No,
But
because if you're
you never could appoint 5 members of the public.
Okay, so that now I understand what you're saying. It's fine if we had a board entirely made up of landscape architects.
I don't know if I'd say it'd
Or
be fine,
architects.
but okay. Right.
But
Right.
You could always possibly also have 2 members that.
Yeah. We do this all the time on other boards and commissions where people are in multiple categories for the same board or commission, and so the same thing could happen. I mean, we could discuss if a valued architect, when we already have 3 on the board, qualifies as a member of the public if they want to do that. That could be a discussion point, but again, if it's up to 3 and up to 3, really the burden lies here to craft the end product, and that's
Yeah.
what I want.
So thank you, Councilmember Jordan. I just wasn't understanding the intent. I can craft that.
Will there be at least an architect with that language or not? It's up to and up to, so you may have a board that has no architects. Okay. Okay.
And Chair Snyder, I think that was the question back here, is just, did we want to say, do we want to have a minimum requirement for a licensed architect?
What is your recommendation?
I think it's, if I may, it's Chair Sneddon and to the committee that it's your preference, and I think again, just I think that can be challenging in terms of recruitment, but I think it's ultimately up to you, and I think the biggest thing is not necessarily tying it to having one person tied to quorum. So it's at your discretion.
So then my preference would be that there be one licensed architect, but that it's not tied to quorum, so that we hold out the hope that we can still get one. So what would that do to your up to and up to numbers? We'd have one licensed architect, and then,
My preference is I'd say one architect and still say up to 3 of both the other 2 categories. And again, it gives you the ability to craft exactly the participants in each category that you want based on the applicants that you see in front of you. It still maintains the ultimate flexibility, so.
sounds good. So we could do one licensed architect, up to 3 in related, and then up to 3 public at large for a maximum of 5, with a quorum of 3 undesignated.
And then no tie of an architect.
Undesignated, yeah. Does that work? Okay. Is that understandable? Okay. Is that a motion? Yeah.
So I'll make that motion similar to what's on the slide from staff. So 5 members. 3 members would constitute a quorum, and we're, by expression there, leaving out a requirement that a particular type of member would have to be part of that quorum. And then the qualifications would be 1 licensed architect, minimum, or just 1 licensed architect, and then up to 3 members in the professional qualifications that adds in some phrase of planner or planning experience, and then up to 3 members appointed from the public at large.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And then I do have a follow-up question, too. If you were to look at the board as it is today, which categories, what would be the makeup according to these categories?
So right now, Chair Sneddon, through you into the committee, we have 1 licensed architect, and that's Board Member Anderson. We have 1 licensed landscape architect, which would fall under the professional qualifications. That's Board Member Katie Klein. And actually the rest are all professional qualifications. We have Chair Miller, Brian Miller, who is not a licensed architect, but he has been practicing architecture and as a designer for many years. And then Board Member Ohan Arakelian has engineering background, so more of the structural engineering.
Thank you. So there's nothing here that would preclude the board
Correct.
as it's, okay, I think that's excellent. Okay. If there are not any other comments, I think we're ready for a vote.
The Ordinance Committee will forward municipal code amendments to council, with 5 members being part of the board. 3 would make a quorum, to include 1 licensed architect, up to 3 professional and related with planning experience, and up to 3 public at large. Any further? That was moved by Councilmember Jordan, seconded by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Yes, and then I just have one question, if it's clear the direction that we want to look at with the clerk's office having off-cycle recruitments.
Okay.
I don't know if that needs to be part of the motion or not, or if that's just
I'll
understood.
put it in there just so it's on the record.
Okay.
It really wasn't, it's not really agendized for that. I can take it as your direction and
Okay.
work with that in the future.
Whichever way you want.
So we'll take a
Let's vote before we cause ourselves more trouble. Yeah.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez,
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
and Chair Sneddon.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you so much.